It's still Friday, 1980. I'm checking in to a gay male boarding house in the DuPont Circle area of D.C. without my knowledge. And it's I'm already in. It's time now to go handle my money. Now, back in 1980, they did not have interstate banks. All the banks within a state, that's all there were. They didn't cross a state line. You couldn't, for example, have your money in a bank in South Carolina, like I did, and then go to Washington, D.C. and pull it out. There was no bank in Washington, D.C. that had your money. It was still in South Carolina. So you would have to get a cashier's check and actually bring it to Washington, D.C. or have the money physically wired to there. I had cashier's checks. So, DuPont Circle being the banking hub of D.C., I was in the right place. I walked into the first bank. I said, I'd like to open an account. They said, see this lady right over here. And I went and sat down at her desk. After 30 minutes, she was still on the same personal telephone call and had never even looked up at me. And I stood up and I left. And I was furious. And I went across the hall, across the road, to another bank. Walked in, did the same thing, and the girl there was absolutely bent over backwards nice. She did everything I needed in plus 10. As a matter of fact, the next week I wrote a letter on letterhead to the bank manager about how good she did, and she got a promotion for that. So anyway, now I've got my money in the bank. I've got starter checks in my hand. I figure I'm set. I've got checks, I've got money, everything's good. Bank's closed. Now it's officially the weekend. So I walk down the street to a little, one of these convenience store things. Walk inside and ask them if they can cash a check. And they say, sure. So I pull out my starter checks and write my address in on the top, and he says, what's your address? And I showed him. I says, Hartnett Hall. And he says, I can't cash a check for somebody who lives at Hartnett Hall. Well, why? Because there's some bad people live at Hartnett Hall. I can't cash checks for people there. We've had trouble with it. So there I was, and every place I went to on the street was pretty much the same story. Walked on down the street through a residential area, quite a long ways, block after block after block. And finally came out in the Georgetown section of D.C., which is where all the nightclubs are and good restaurants and stuff like that. And was walking up and down there trying to find somewhere that looked like they might cash a check, but it was looking real unlikely. And then I was accosted by a person on the street, and he asked me to come over and asked me if I'd like to take a free course at his church. And I said, well, you cash a check? He said, well, nobody's ever asked me that, but let me check. So I told them how much I wanted. They said, sure, that'd be fine. So I hopped in the van of the Church of Scientology and took off. They are very active in the D.C. area, it seems. And so we went to their, me and several other people that they had grabbed from the street, went to their church nearby there, and did their little course. Now the first course consisted of me and one other guy in a room And we had an index card that we kept passing back and forth. And this index card had 3 questions on it. And the first 2 questions were, name something you like, and name something you don't like. And our instructions were to keep asking the other person those 2 questions over and over and over and over and over and over. And when they finally went blank, ask them the 3rd question, name something you can get into. They were to answer that, and then you give them the card. And then they ask you questions back until you get stumped, and then you swap back again and again and again. And we did this for an hour. And, the first 5 minutes is relatively easy. The next 5 minutes is kind of hard. And the remaining 50 minutes is torture. But oddly, at the end of it all, you have the most incredible cathartic feeling inside, because you've been digging so deep, and you feel like somehow, gosh, I've learned something. I've gotten this spiritual awakening. When that's not what happened at all. You basically just got a tired mind from all these questions. But it feels like that. And then the next thing is, you can come back and take the next course. It's only $15. Well, sure, because look at this free one was so good, and the next one's even going to be better. So, the way Scientology works is this. You take the free course, and then the next one is $15. And then the next one is $30. And then the next one is $45. And then the next one is $60. And etc., 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 until you get to the very end, where you have the privilege of buying a little clear bracelet that goes around your wrist for maybe $1,000. And that tells everyone that you have cleared your mind of all of the bad stuff. And that's how they do it. And not to mention, you've cleared your wallet of all of the money that you probably could have used for something else. Well, I went to work for my first couple of days with the congressman, and it started bothering me, because the more I looked into this Church of Scientology, the more I found out stuff like they'd had FBI raids, and it was just bad news. And I didn't want to call him from his office, and I didn't have a phone in my little green room. So one day, I walked out of the office, went to a payphone, called him up, canceled my mess. And that's my experience with the Church of Scientology.